That's
Yeah,
exciting.
you're both named in the article. Mike is just coming in.
Hey guys,
Hey, Mike,
Hey,
how you
Micah.
doing?
how are things?
Things are great. We just wrapped up Columbia River Estuary Conference here in Astoria.
How'd it go?
It was really good. A lot of good talks. The main focus was kind of looking at climate change adaptability and resiliency, sea level rise, those kind of things.
Nice.
But yeah, a lot of good presentations.
Did either of you present?
Oh no, we did poster presentations.
Good.
Yeah, so we didn't have to get up in front of the whole group. We're saving that honor for you guys.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Was CREST one of the organizers again this year?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Very good. Well, it's nice to hear your voices, and thanks for making time for us today.
Yeah, no problem.
Sure.
Give us a few minutes. We're going to have people drifting in. Do you all have any questions for me? Or are you good to go?
I think we're good to go. I can't tell if our camera is even working.
Well, we can't see you, but we can see your slides, which
Okay.
is fine. We can hear you just fine. Can you see us? Can you see the classroom?
Yeah, we can see you. I don't really see this. Oh, start video maybe?
So do we need to start video on this end?
No, we can see you guys
No,
clearly.
it's recording. What I'm going to do is I'm going to mess around with the camera position so that you can see the whole classroom. Give me just a minute.
So I wonder why we can't see them. Oh, there they are.
All right. Well
Right.
done. Nice to see you. So what are you guys seeing? Just part of the classroom or all of us?
We're seeing
We're seeing ourselves in your screen.
in both of your screens.
Funny. All right, let me see what I can do. This is always kind of a pain.
Are they seeing them?
Yeah, no, it'll pop up. Mike will get it by trial and error. So the first test question is, which one is Tom and which one is Jason? Don't tell us.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Try to determine.
We'll do an intro when we get started.
Yeah, that's great. I like you guys. You're very academic with all the books and law journals in the background.
Yeah, that's all we do. Scholarly endeavors every day.
Yeah, we have basketball shorts on though right now.
and muddy boots, right? Yeah.
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 Oh, there we go. Now we can see the class.
All right, good.
Good job, Mike.
Okay, we can see you, you can see us. I think that's the first time this year that we've achieved that.
I think we're gonna have 3 more people show up, so just give it a couple of minutes.
Great.
Do we have to?
Nate's calling in sick.
Nate's out.
Yeah, he's home sick.
Yeah, because it was in that
Okay.
right there. This takes a second.
There we go. Perfect. Our general layout is, I'm gonna do scheduling and
Yeah. You got your notes on that one.
yeah, I think so.
Okay. Just have to double click. Click
Yeah.
on both live.
Here, right there. I'll do a double-handed.
There you go.
Yeah, I was trying to just so if I'd have them here.
Right.
But-
Now you got full-time slides.
Yeah, it is a nice little backdrop here.
Mm-hmm. I think he might have meant they're over budget by 600. Not 600K.
Yeah, that would be,
That would be a healthy feasibility budget. Over.
yeah, that would be bad. I thought about getting us the projector that way it could be looking at it and have this in front of us.
Oh yeah.
And then because then it goes into presenter mode where you have the dual screen,
Okay.
and then you have these notes. If you had. Were you there for Curtis?
Any questions from you all?
On this one? Yeah, I didn't get it. Yeah, that's kind of bummed about that.
Yeah. That one's on.
See you in CNR tomorrow.
This Army Corps guy had like done live. He had ability to just and then he was coaching on the softball. It looked awesome.
Yeah.
And they're all they tagged family. And they
Yeah,
also
I mean, a lot of those
tagged some
former pasture lands have been
You could, like,
abandoned.
it wasn't modeled, it was like live stream. What is it? The line? You're watching the.
Yeah.
That's what happened in that case.
I think it's pretty cool.
No, they have no legal rights. Yeah, it's no longer their property.
Did you give my email this morning?
I mean, a lot of
About what courses?
became public because of tax.
Email excuse that.
You know, Western,
Yeah.
the state
Yeah, I sent it
forest.
to your boss.
I moved my car.
Yeah.
Former private
There, might as well.
logged, burned, whatever, and then
I learned breed.
abandoned. And when someone stops paying their taxes on the land,
Can I literally go
Is that
one
really
stop?
it hurts to the public. And sometimes you'll take those pieces and
Anyways, that chalk isn't facing
Well,
down.
did I wrote to your boss?
Yes, I could go.
I wrote to your boss to excuse you. Tori, did you have other classes you were in? On Thursday, 26th?
Just the,
I would just.
462.
That's a really great question. I don't actually know
See, that's what
the mechanism.
Yeah.
Some chains have been closed on
One block. There's no place.
Matt, did you tell me what course?
Oh, well,
Did
in
I
that
send you a
case,
note
I
back?
might revert to,
Who were yours?
This block.
I don't know, it's tricky, like, when does it revert
Between us,
to
City Hall,
Mhm.
or not City Hall.
public jurisdiction versus reverting to the bank? So
Yeah,
like,
but I just
it reverts
courtesy,
to
I
the
like
bank
to
if
tell.
there's like a lien on it or a mortgage on it, you know? But if there's no outstanding, financial payments due, and it's just a tax issue, I think it goes to the public agency, usually the county.
When I first.
But the exact
What you do.
trigger, I don't know.
Right, time to get 87, 82.
Yeah, we should go ahead now.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, guys. We're missing a couple people, but we need to get started, so you may have a couple people drift in, no worries.
No problem.
Okay, so we have Tom Josephson and Jason Smith with us. I go way back with them, and it's such a pleasure to see them here with us today. They are both habitat restoration project managers with CREST, so very much doing what we've been talking about all term. And they're going to give you some background on how they got into this work and some of the projects that they are excited about, and then also just talk to us about what it takes to supervise projects on the ground and get things implemented on schedule, on time, if possible. I think that's all I'm going to do. I think one of you is a senior. Tom, are you a senior project manager now?
That's right. Yeah. Once you get into
Congratulations on
double
that.
digits, you get into the senior level. So.
Well done, good work. Okay, so I'm gonna hand it off to you all, and if it's okay with you, we'll just ask questions throughout and keep
Yeah,
it
that
kind of
sounds good.
informal.
Dude.
Excellent. All right, take it away.
Sure. So yeah, thanks, Micah. As he said, we're both project managers. I'm a senior project manager. I've been with CREST for about 6.5 years, putting projects on the ground. I'm CREST is based out of Astoria, Oregon, but I'm actually upriver in the Portland area, and focus on my projects up in that area. So really, we're just going to kind of run through what we do and kind of how we try to look ahead and try to anticipate different scenarios and what could go right, what could go wrong on our projects, and walk you through what that process is like. And then we each have projects as case studies and kind of talk through what worked, what we had to field fit, and kind of looking ahead as well.
Great.
All right, and then I am Jason Smith, and I've been with CREST for about 9 years. Started as just kind of a seasonal biotech, and then worked my way into a full-time biologist and in the monitoring department, and been a project manager now. Transitioned into project management. I've been a project manager now for it'll be 3 years at the end of this month. So yeah, it's been a exciting time to be with CREST. There's a lot that's been happening, and yeah, I've just had a pleasure of kind of being along for the ride. With that, we'll kind of jump into the project management, and we're going to start with the exciting topic of scheduling.
Good. We've been practicing that lately, so
Yeah.
timely.
Okay, that's good. Well, then that's good news for me, because then I can kind of skip over some of the, or kind of go through a little quicker some of the less interesting topics. But you know, as you know, project managers, we have to develop these schedules so we can plan and control all the activities that make up the project. When you assemble your team, they really rely on these accurate, good schedules to execute the work and get everything done on time. There's a lot of different ways you can do this, but the main way to do it is the project schedule. It's the most common type used by project managers, and it builds on the other types of schedules described and kind of includes start and end dates, the duration of each activity, and the major milestones. And you guys are probably familiar with, they're commonly displayed as a Gantt chart, and those, you know, can look a lot of different ways, but these are the common Gantt charts, and you know, they kind of break down everything and gives you a really good visual technique, and it's just the go-to tool for most project managers when they want to get a quick estimate of the time it will take to complete all the project activities. There's a lot of pros to the Gantt chart. You know, it's just easy to view projects. It's very adaptable, and just has ability to set accurate deadlines and define dependencies and many more. You know, the basic project, you know, you have this project development life cycle. It starts in planning, design, implementation, and aftercare, and it's a constantly developing cycle. You're always leaning on lessons learned and building on that for the next project. But these are kind of your main 4 topics. So the CREST project life cycle is, you know, slightly different, you know, because we're focusing in mostly on habitat restoration for juvenile salmon. But the project development typically starts off with site visits, recon, word of mouth, talking, you know, to local landowners, things like that, or past project lists that have been created by past project managers looking to implement these restoration projects. The GALE, Micah's familiar with that, but that GALE stands for the Get After It list, and that was, we created this list of projects that looked like they had really good restoration potential. CREST has been working our way through that list pretty effectively in the last 8 to 10 years. And so now we're having to get a little bit more creative and trying to find new projects. But basically, once we've kind of identified a project, we start our landowner outreach and see if the landowner wants to be on board. And if the landowner does want to participate in restoration, we typically get them to sign some sort of acknowledgement form, and then that gives us permission to go to our kind of funders and see if we can't get this restoration project on the ground. And if the funder agrees, then we typically send out a request for proposal, feasibility and design, and so that's all your design consultants that kind of come out to the site, and they'll take a look at it, and then they'll submit their proposal. And the CREST, we assemble a scoring team or review team, and we look through those, and we have a scoring criteria that we go through that's based on a lot of things, like their team qualifications, their experience doing relevant projects, title projects, all sorts of things like that. And then once we've kind of picked the best consultant that has the best team, we'll award them a contract to begin feasibility and hopefully kind of follow through all the rest of the design. You may be familiar with feasibility, but it's just basically we're identifying a project concept, and we create a goal map that determines approximate acreage of additional tidal inundation, stream miles connected, proximity to the main stem, and many other things that could benefit juvenile salmon. But it's just a tool to determine if a project pencils out from a cost-benefit perspective. And all these feasibility considerations are developed at the project outset and typically include, landowner permit and construction and other cost considerations. All right, so once we've kind of gone through the feasibility and we've determined that we have, a feasible project, we'll jump into the site surveying and analysis. And this is, you guys remember you had a presentation from Narayan. I think that was last week. Narayan's right in the middle of that photograph there with our RTK. And basically what he's doing is just a topographic survey, and we're trying to ground truth the LiDAR to create a hydraulic model and estimate construction quantities and things like that. And we also, in addition to going out and surveying, we also are collecting the water surface elevations and things like that to help calibrate and inform the model. Additional sources, we look at river gauge data that's been around for a lot longer than just some of these shorter data sets that we create at a project site. We also look at aerial photography and historical maps. We can reach out to the Army Corps of Engineers and get aerial images dating back the early 1900s, and it kind of really informs you what the site used to look like and kind of what's happened in the time since. But we also look at geology, soils, land ownerships, fish use, and a lot of other things. So once we've kind of gone through feasibility and we determine we have a feasible project, we can jump into an alternatives analysis. And that's, typically we request the consultants to provide 3 or more alternatives that will achieve one or all of the project goals and objectives. Those alternatives can be very simple, from like no action at all to like, just remove a levee or levees and channel excavation. What informs an alternative analysis? Well, usually it's using information gained from the site survey and analysis. A hydraulic model of the site is developed, and a GIS-based tidal prism analysis can be conducted, comparing existing tidal prism to the potential increase under your proposed restoration scenario. And it kind of evaluates each action support of project objectives and species limiting factors. And it further describes feasibility constraints such as rough cost, possible land ownership impacts. We don't want to be flooding landowners or creating any risks to infrastructures by increasing velocity or other things like that. And then there's maintenance considerations as well. Yeah.
How involved are you as a project manager in shaping what you want to see in those different alternatives?
So we're pretty involved. I mean, most of the time we have an idea in the very beginning of exactly what we want to do.
Right.
And it's just really, it's kind of a checks and balances. The design consultants come in and they look at it in much more further depth with all the modeling and all these other things. And they sometimes do come up with new solutions that we didn't quite think of. But oftentimes, we provide them with the idea of what we would like to do, and then they kind of take that and they run it through, you know, and analyze whether or not it's going to be a high risk project or a good project or bad project, and all sorts of things like that. Do you have anything else you'd?
Yeah, and I mean, it's kind of, as he said, it's when we first approach these sites, and I guess to back up, you know, we're looking at it in terms of what can we do for juvenile fish passage, because that's predominantly our funders is Bonneville Power and looking to reconnect floodplain habitat for out migrating fish. And so Jason and I have been to enough sites, we've seen enough projects, carried through enough projects, we kind of have a general idea of, okay, that culvert should come out, we could put in this size bridge, we could do a breach over here, we could restore these channels. But really it is the design team and the stakeholder team, whether it's public agency partners or private landowners or both, that help us kind of determine, is it 3 breaches, 5 breaches, 6 breaches? Are they going to be 100 feet open, 200 feet open? And they're going to bring those, not only hydraulic analysis through modeling, but also cost. And, you know, we'd love to restore everything. We'd love to pull out every single levee, every single impoundment, but the economics of it don't pencil out. And so all that goes into your alternative analysis, and really trying to get the best result for the site.
Gotcha. Thank you. That's helpful.
Mm-hmm. So kind of jumping back in, this is what we're looking at right here is, you know, I just did a lot of blabbing about modeling, and so I kind of want to show you. I'm not going to go into further detail about modeling because, quite frankly, it can be above my head as well, and everything that goes into it to create the model. But I always think it's fun to kind of see the videos of what, you know, our design consultants are modeling and showing, you know, how these breaching and the channels and all that improves the hydrologic connectivity to the site. But this is Westport Slough, and I'll kind of go into a little further detail in a few slides down. But basically, this site was owned by U.S. Fish and Wildlife. It's a 160-acre site that has this levee wrapping around the entire site, with the exception of one natural breach that happened, you know, a few decades ago. And but the rest of the site has this remaining levee. So currently, the only hydrologic connectivity is through that one breach. And so the top photos existing conditions, the bottom's proposed conditions, and the proposed conditions we're proposing 7 breaches. And you'll see as I click through these here that, you know, the hydrologic connectivity is coming in from the whole perimeter of the site, no longer just through that western side of the property.
So what you're seeing is, this is the model showing, okay, if you do breach this, all this new area shown in light green is newly inundated for food web connectivity as well as fish passage.
Mm-hmm. Really what you're seeing here is not only just fish passage in and out of this really high quality wetland, but you're also, you know, you're talking about you're moving this water in and out, so you're supporting kind of the flux of organic materials out into the slough, whereas it was formerly isolated and kind of trapped in the site. And so those organic materials support the food web. So not only is it, you know, the bottom of the food web, but you also have prey export happening and other cool things. So just thought I'd show you guys that real quick. And so here's the site, and what you're seeing here is the levee wrapped around it is what all the trees are currently on. And in the interior of the site, all just this really high quality scrub shrub wetland. It's in really good shape. It's almost 100% native species. There's some fringe reed canary grass on the margins, but just really a high quality site that currently fish are only accessing it from one spot. And so we start moving through our alternatives analysis. You know, you can do nothing. I mean, the site's in good shape, but it's just not maximizing the potential it could have. The alternative 1 is typically, you know, do nothing. We usually don't spend much time on that because obviously we want to restore the site. And alternative 2 that we came up for Westport Slough was 3 breaches. Here's the kind of the goal map. We came up here for 3 breaches, and we were looking to see how that would restore, the connectivity and the hydrology. And it really wasn't showing us the modeling that we wanted to see. It really, it took longer. And so we looked at another option, and that was 7 breaches in the channel excavation, which is what I just showed you in the modeling. That did an amazing job and restored the site. The fourth alternative we usually come up with is a really big pie in the sky alternative. And as you can assume with each of these, the alternatives get more expensive as you go up. Do nothing, obviously, is free. But yeah, they get more expensive and more complicated. With this case, we decided to go with alternative 3 because it achieved, the pie in the sky, but at a much more feasible and much reduced price. So our preferred alternative, again, was these 7 breaches, and that's to restore the hydrologic connectivity. We also did 4 pilot channels, and a pilot channel is just, we don't excavate, the channel as far as it's going to develop. We just excavate a small channel, and it usually has a steeper slope at the end of the channel, which kind of promotes head cut and allows that channel to kind of develop on its own and advance. In some spots they don't advance at all. It's kind of a mixture of art and science. You don't really know where they're going to naturally develop, but in some areas they can cruise along. Micah, you'd be impressed to see Fort Columbia these days. It's really moved quite a long ways into that 97-acre wetland complex. And
that's outstanding. Good news.
It looks amazing, and the channel's full of all this large wood. I mean, it's incredible.
Good.
And also, the other thing we did is, we try to keep costs down. So one way we could keep costs down is when you got to breaching these levees and removing this levee. If you're on a site that's sort of isolated like this and doesn't have a road right next to it that you can haul material in and out of, we have to kind of come up with solutions to keep the cost down. And one of those solutions was to keep the material on site, and we created this topographic complexity kind of moundings on the backside of the existing that we didn't breach, and the idea was that it could also help support Columbia white-tailed deer habitat, which is listed species in there, known to be in the area, and this is on U.S. Fish and Wildlife property. So it is achieving multi-species benefits and helping us keep the cost down. Once we've selected the preferred alternative, it typically goes through a 30, 60, and 90 and final construction ready design phases. And that 60% design is used for permitting applications. And this just kind of gives us an ability to streamline the project timing to try to move these projects along quickly. As you know, salmon are a listed species, and the quicker we can do these restoration projects, the quicker they can benefit from them. And I'll let Tom go into permitting in further detail, but I just want to say one last thing is that we, kind of plan on, from a scheduling perspective, 6 months to a year before permits are issued is when we start applying. We apply for permits, and then it usually takes about 6 months to a year.
Yeah, so permitting, so much fun. One of the highlights of our job. It also, I don't know about you, Jason, but it's the one that I lose the most sleep over, just because there's so much unknown, and you could have a really good project, and a certain regulatory agency might have a small issue with the way you design your channel opening, the width of your bridge, other impacts to other species that it could get derailed. So there's a lot of unknown, but we are fortunate in that we are doing restoration and enhancement. So we have a lot of support from our funders and from the regulatory folks who want to see these type of floodplain reconnection projects happen. So I don't need to go into all the details, but there are generally 3 levels of permits that you need to acquire: federal, state, and local. The federal is typically through the Army Corps of Engineers, and that's going to cover things listed under the ESA, NEPA, Clean Water Act, and that's really going to give you permission to work in wetland area, work in stream areas, and go into the details about that. They also cover cultural resource compliance, which is it's a hugely important factor in all these projects, especially in the Lower Columbia. Native communities have been here for thousands of years, and people have either lived right along the river or especially seasonally been on the river, having camps, having other temporary settlements, permanent settlements. And so really making sure that you're not impacting those resources is hugely important. And then depending on how complicated the project is, you could be required to do a wetland delineation for the entire site. The project I just worked on, we had to do a biological assessment. So it's different levels of compliance. And then the state typically mirrors the federal. I mean, I don't know how Idaho is, but I know Washington and Oregon, they take that compliance very seriously, and we have to do a lot of work to make sure that we're not impacting wetlands in a negative way. And the state takes a really close look at that. And then the local side of things are usually floodplain development permits, grading permits. And again, county to county, it's a huge difference. I've had projects that are outside of the Portland area that the county permits I get within 3 or 4 weeks. It's very straightforward. And I have projects in the city of Portland, and those take 6 months, 9 months, a year, and they ask for all sorts of additional goodies. So it all kind of depends on your site. But as Jason said before, in general, you need to plan for at least 6 months, if not more. And if you have a complicated project, if you have infrastructure, you're on a public roadway, all those good things, it's going to take even more. And really, when I fill out these permit applications, or Jason does, like, our name and our reputation is on the line with these. And so we not only have to fully comply with these permits, but we need to make sure that the construction crew doing the project is absolutely following those guidelines and not putting us in violation. Because, our reputation is key in this whole thing. And we feel fortunate enough, like CREST has a good reputation with regulatory folks, and we want to keep it that way. We want them to know when we're proposing to work in the water, work in these wetlands, we know how to do it. We're going to hire good crews that can do low impact methods, and we're not going to just go in like a bunch of yahoos and tear everything up. So that reputation is key. And then just a couple other tips. Sometimes they have post-project monitoring in terms of plant survival that you might need to take into consideration, you might need to budget for. And then what we found really helpful is a lot of these permitting agencies will meet with you ahead of time before you submit your permit. So once you have that 30%, 60% design set, and you can sit down and you can hopefully get multiple agencies in the room with you, and ideally get them out to the site as well. That's a little harder from time to time, but go through the project, go through why it's such a great restoration or enhancement project, all the benefits you're doing, and they can hopefully identify any, hey, Tom, I'm concerned about this component. I don't want you to put I don't want you to put soils over there. I think it's better if you move them over there. How come the channel is in this alignment? You can talk through that, and instead of you putting in a permit application and 3 months down the road when they get to it, because they give you a permits, they ask you to change the designs and you've already moved on with your designs. It's just a really good way to kind of get ahead of some of those things. So that's it on permitting, unless anybody has any burning questions.
Questions? So if you have a project that's in a new jurisdiction that you're not familiar with, I take it you'll reach out to staff level folks who are on the regulatory side to determine exactly what they need from you?
Yeah, absolutely. And ideally, if you can even work with like a local soil and water office,
okay.
And even if they're not a partner, but at least go to them and say, hey, you guys have done similar types of work. What is it usually? What do the regulatory people usually get hung up on? That can be helpful. And even when you do all the right things and you invite people and you do the pre-permit meetings and everything else, they still sometimes won't sign the document that you need to submit another permit. So there's this whole chain of custody and things like that, and you have to go through the process. But to answer your question, you absolutely want to meet with these people, get them to know you, know your agency, and hopefully build that trust and get, for the most part, these folks are definitely on board with these projects, but you do have to do it their way. And every agency, every county, every city is a little different. So you just got to learn the way they want everything written and go from there.
Okay, great advice, thanks.
Yeah, and it can be really helpful to bring them on even earlier in the design process. Many times it can be, really helpful to, if they feel like they've been involved in the design process earlier, it can kind of help you smooth those transitions, especially if it's somebody we haven't worked with in the past and it's a new project. You get turnover all the time, and if it's a new person, then bringing them on board earlier can be huge.
Yeah, even at the feasibility stage in that situation.
Okay.
So kind of jumping back a little bit to more scheduling talks, once we've received these final designs, the permitting stuff's happening. We receive final designs, and those include plan set, technical specs, base design report, and the OPC, which is the opinion and probable cost. And these designs have now been reviewed and approved by CREST, stakeholders, regulatory agencies, so on and so forth. We can start moving into construction. And this is, Westport Slough again, and here's our 7 breach sites are in green. It kind of looks like you only see 6 there, but there's 2 that are right next to each other on the, I don't know if you can see my cursor or not. Yep. But right here, there's two breaches next to each other. But anyways, the final plans include a lot of detail typically, and these 2 slides I'm showing you don't really have a whole lot, but usually they'll have your plan view here, which is the upper view, and you'll have your profile views of each of these elements, and really that's just, and they'll have quantity tables and sequencing notes and all this other information to inform the contractor, because you really want to do everything you can in these designs to minimize any contractor uncertainty. Because the second they don't know what they're doing, and if you're not there to answer it, that's when we get into trouble. But we'll talk about that in a later slide. The conceptual scheduling for construction. These are really informal. If you have questions about each one of these, let me know. But I'll just cruise through these real quick. You put it out to bid around 90% or final design. You have a mandatory site visit for all construction projects, whereas design, once it's out to bid, those are not always a mandatory site visit, but we typically make construction mandatory because it's good to have their eyes on. And you answer any of the contractor questions they have about what they're bidding on. You give them a few weeks, and all their proposals come in. We review, score their proposals. We award a contract. Once the contract is awarded, we always want to bring all the stakeholders and the contractor, and the design consultants to a pre-construction meeting, again, to iron out any uncertainty there is and make sure that everybody's on the same page and has the same vision. Then once everything's going, before we can start, you want to get your submittals from the contractor, whether that's your shoring plans, your dewatering plans, whatever that may be. Then we hire on an outside surveyor, usually to stake, or the contractor. You can build in a contract to have them do the surveying and staking. We like to kind of do that and be in charge of it. That way we can, if we see an area that has like a huge spruce tree that we want to save, or if the design is encroaching, on like a creek or like a, high quality little wetland area that we didn't really know was there, we can make small adjustments with the design consultants beforehand, and you don't necessarily have that flexibility if you let the contractor do it. Then the mobilization and all the fun starts happening. So that's implementing the control plan, clearing, grubbing, salvage where possible. What I mean there is salvage any plants that you can salvage. We've had a lot of success setting aside a mat of sluice sedge or something like that. If it's a big mat, you can set it aside and then later set it back down in your planting site, and it can just supplement your planting plan. yeah, and then you start implementing the restoration actions. That's, you know, the levee removal, marsh plane lowering, scrape down, channel excavation, you know, so on and so forth. And then once all that's done, it's the planting and the seeding and then the closeout. And then Narayan and April continue on the monitoring, and then that monitoring informs us if we need to do any maintenance. And so that was a lot of talking, and so now I'll kind of show you some photos unless you have some questions about any of those.
What is grubbing?
Grubbing is it's a technique of you're not taking out the entire root mass of the plant. You're taking off the, you know, the top veg. And you know, if we're in a site that has you know, willows, you know, but we need to get construction access, if you don't take out that root mass, often it'll come back, and that's just another way to supplement your planting plan. No sense removing a good source of native veg if it's already there.
Cool, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Good question. So at Westport Slough, as I was saying, you know, access is kind of challenging. So a lot of times we have to create, you know, other ways of accessing the site to minimize our disturbance, because, you know, if we have a really high quality site that just needs a little bit of improvements, like removing that levee, you know, we want to minimize our impact. We don't want to create a road through this wetland to restore the site. So in this case, we have, you can see an excavator here on a barge, and we delivered all the equipment to the levee, minimized that footprint of impact just to the areas that we wanted to remove the levee. And so here's one of those breaches. This is breach B, and there's a channel back there. It's kind of hard to see, but it's it looks like it's somewhere right about over here. It's just not a really good angle. But what I always like to say is that, and well, I think it was Matt Van Ness, or maybe it was you, Mike, I don't know, but we've always say you got to break an egg to make an omelet with these restoration projects. So at first it looks a little nasty, but this is a year later. So a year and a half later, but it looks amazing post restoration. And this is at low tide. So typically, you know, the goal of this project is increased connectivity. And this is again at low tide here, but this is breach C. But at high tide, this would be underwater, and it would be allowing these channels that are back in here allow fish access during all tidal stages. But you know, the marsh plane is intertidal here. So.
Hey, Jason.
Yeah.
Do you know much about the land use history at this site?
Yes. So
what was going on there before U.S. Fish and Wildlife became the property owner?
So a long time ago, it was the terminus for a historic railroad line, the Cary Terminal, that exported billions of board feet off of all the adjacent hillsides, and they basically brought the logs down on the levee and on the train, and then they dumped the logs into Westport Slough to log raft them out. There was no mill at the site. So that was what the levee once was serving, the only purpose. The interior of the site, the reason it's such a high quality wetland with a, you know, really diverse kind of native shrub communities, because it never was farmed or cleared. And so that's kind of a unique opportunity. We want to minimize our disturbance as much as possible, and that's another, you know, that was why we were floating in the excavators, and it's just a unique site.
Yeah, we've been looking at a lot of case studies that are former ag lands, and so this is a very different scenario. Thank you for painting that picture.
Yeah. So kind of going back into the scheduling terminology, I won't spend too much time on this, but if you guys do have questions about any of these components, let us know. I'd say the big ones here are really, you know, the milestones. You know, you got to know your milestones, because those indicate start and end dates of a series of related activities or accomplishments. And then the critical path, you know, the longest continuous path. Constraints, activity, all those things are important, but really in the scheduling world, you know, the critical path and knowing your milestones and all those things are very important. so kind of creating the project schedule can be a little tricky, but you know, there's multiple ways to do it. I myself am in favor. I like to do the sticky note method. It's really organized, as you can see here. You kind of come up with all these activities and all these items, and you develop your logical sequence of events. And you know, you have your arrows pointing, connecting to them, showing before and after relationships, so on and so forth. You really want it to look more along the lines of this. But it's, you know, the one nice thing about sticky notes is that you can move them around and really can kind of give you a conceptual idea of what you're looking at before you start creating charts and so on and so forth. So one big thing to always know in scheduling, particularly, you know, well, through design and construction, is you got to be prepared for change. In design, something can come up. You know, whether you could already be through like 60 or something % design, and then when you start doing your cultural resource survey, you could, you know, come across fire-cracked rock or remains or, you know, who knows what. Or in the construction, you know, a lot of things can happen, like weather, equipment availability, so on and so forth. But, you know, procuring materials, tools, equipment, all these things can impact your schedule in a hurry. And, you know, once you start losing control of your schedule, you start running up against your restrictions, like our in-water work window, what we're typically, you know, that typically controls in large, you know, our schedule. For the most part, I'd say that's one of the biggest confinements we have down here, working on the river and working in these tidal sites. We're trying to help the fish, and the work windows are there for a reason, to keep us from, you know, digging and creating turbidity and potentially, you know, harming the exact species we're trying to help. You know, these are just kind of some more details, really kind of going into the nuts and bolts. Some of the key things to consider here, you know, you want to know, you need the consultants and the contractors to accept your schedule. You need to have weather clauses in there, just so, you know, you're not getting hit with all sorts of change orders and things later. These are all just things that help you plan ahead. Again, you know, some of the keys here, you know, we just want to a lot of the times we get these schedules from the design consultants, you know, in their proposals, and from the contractors. And when we receive their schedules, we want to make sure it meshes with, you know, what we had in mind. And so there's a lot of things that you want to check. You know, is it compliant with your specification requirements? Are the milestones in tune with what you had in mind? You know, does it work with your critical path to you know, finish the project before the end of your in-water work window? Are all the items included? You know, as-builts are something that are often required from us, and if you don't pay attention to their schedules and their deliverables, you can get yourself in a little bit of trouble. So there's a lot of things to consider, and you know, I think the overall goal of scheduling, and we can put scheduling to bed, is that you know, you gotta time management is hugely important, and I'm sure you guys covered that in all your scheduling discussions.
So I'll just kind of quickly go over the construction documents and contracting. So, you know, so as a project manager, you've been going to the site for a couple years, maybe even longer. You've been working with all these stakeholders. You've been designing this perfect project. Your design team has given you awesome plans and specs. Well, now you need to take all that information and make sure that it's conveyable to the person running the excavator, running the dozer, running the heavy equipment, to actually implement it. And so it's really critical that your design team, your engineering team, puts together a set of plans and specs that are easily understandable, concise, and you know, the reality is most of these contractors are not going to read through your specifications, but they are super important, because if anything goes wrong, then you can point to it, and it not only covers you legally, but it also, this is the way I want it done. And it's really a balancing act, because you can't assume that they're going to read through all these documents, but you need to have a really clear plan set where you can actually sit down, have a tailgate meeting at the start of the day with these contractors, the people behind the machines, and go through the plans and be like, okay, what does your week look like? What does your day look like? Okay, did you notice in these plans that you've got a 3-to-1 side slope over here? And I'm really interested in protecting the cedars. So if you could work around that, that would be great. Just like going through that, and that's really key during that construction oversight, is you can have the perfectly designed plan for a site, but you need to make sure that the people on the ground are going to implement it the way that you want it, and is also the way that regulatory agencies want it. And so again, having that rapport with your contractor, whether it's the foreman or the individual operators, is super key. And you also need to know your limitations. And so if they're asking you a question about, hey, I noticed in the plans it says this side slope around this culvert, but I'm concerned about that being too steep or whatever, then you really need to get your engineer involved, get them out to the site, and possibly a geotechnical structural engineer. So your job as a project manager is to understand your plans, understand your specs, understand your permit compliance, but also really know when you need to ask for help and like call the engineer and like get the big stuff settled. Yeah, so that's construction documents. And then the contracting, again, a lot of the things that Jason described in terms of the scheduling and including that in the specifications, contingencies for weather delays, all that stuff, that can all be covered in your contract documents. And really those are, you don't want it to come down to this, but you do want your contract with these organizations to be pretty ironclad and protect you as the agency, the landowner, whatever, from any possible lawsuits down the road. Because it's never fun when the lawyers get involved. And I'm not saying that you need to create a contract that is super verbose and super lawyer speak, but it should have certain provisions that protect your agency and especially you. And make sure that if you're working with a public agency or a private landowner, all these stipulations ahead of time and you include that in your contract. I've got a job coming up this summer. It's got 4 private landowners and 2 public agencies. And literally each one of those entities has specific rules and regulations, whether it's herbicide treatment or working hours, or literally like one of the landowners doesn't like dogs. So I can't bring my dog out to the project site during construction oversight. So it's all these little things that if you've done your due diligence and you understand it and you can just simply outline it in your contract, it's going to protect you down the road.
Tom,
Yeah.
Speaking of protecting your interests, do you have a lawyer look over your contracts on a project-by-project basis, or just kind of the templates?
Just the template. It's a really good question. Basically, a number of years ago, CREST reformatted the contract, and a lawyer definitely looked it over and said this covers CREST. But I will tell you that the same project that I was just alluding to, the state lawyers got involved because it's on state land, and they basically added a bunch of additional requirements that are just above and beyond what we typically do.
Okay.
So any time the lawyers get involved, it's going to get more complicated, and anytime it's a big, high visibility project, it's gonna have a lot more scrutiny. But to answer your question, I don't think you don't necessarily need a lawyer for every single contract. But if you could set up a template that is reviewed by a lawyer and protects you, that's probably a smart move.
Great.
So I'm gonna head back over to Jason. He's gonna kind of go through construction, and then I think we'll go into some case studies.
Yeah, so we're just going to touch a little bit on implementation and kind of oversight. And so, we've already talked about how the projects are implemented, but this is more the management practices and techniques where needed. Tom was just talking about kind of how we have to cover all of our, we have to make sure that we know exactly what we're getting into before we get into it. And this is what these next few slides are going to go over. So, it's just a process. Implementation oversight is a process of assuring the quality of the project management and delivery. It's a governance role designed to reduce project risks and improve the outcomes. It also, that when we talked about the life cycle of the project, one of the first slides, it plays an improvement role on, and Tom, I guarantee, has learned in the 10, 15 projects or whatever he's done just out on Savi Island alone. There's all sorts of lessons learned, and so it's implementation oversight's not only just reducing the project risk and improving the outcomes, but it's also about lessons learned. Okay, so yeah, one big thing, and Tom again kind of touched base on this, but you really need to define your role. CREST, we're kind of in an interesting spot because we have been with the project from preliminary, from a conceptual basis all the way through design, and we know a lot about the project, all the stakeholders, everybody involved. So we're kind of the project supervisor, but we're also kind of the site inspectors because we hold all the permits, and we're the ones who are going to be in trouble if the contractors don't kind of abide by the permits and don't kind of follow the plans. But there's many different roles that you can have. Some outfits decide to do a design build, and that's where they just hire one agency to do the design and then bring it all the way through construction. We typically don't do many design builds. We typically do more of a, we get a separate design consultant and then we hire a contractor completely separate, and they may have subs and all that. And we are out there on site a lot of the times in construction just to make sure they're following the plans accordingly. And then when they're not, we kind of can shut them down a little bit and know when we need to contact the design consultants if they're getting off path.
Corrective measures.
Yeah. And this is I can kind of skip through this because this is what I just went through here, but site inspection is key throughout a project. As we said, we are holding the permits. Tom and I are both certified erosion and sediment control leads, and so we do these permit applications, and we're also the ones kind of monitoring and make sure the project's following the permits, making sure we're not causing excessive turbidity or just any violations of the permit. We're out there to make sure that everything's kind of going according to plan. So this kind of gets into the more nitty gritty of it, but there's two kind of things: your hard hat functions and soft hat functions. What we sometimes call them, but the hard hat functions are like your checking grades, whereas the soft hat functions of a site inspector is ensuring the materials installed on site comply with the project specifications, making sure they're doing the planting plans right, and things like that. And large projects like I'll show you Project Megler Creek, which is through a state highway. Those type of projects are going to have many site inspectors checking. Their focus is on one item, like looking at compaction or looking at the roadway, or your geotech is checking to make sure that whatever the substrate is you're putting the culvert on will meet the criteria that they specified in design. So yeah, this is we've already talked about this, but their role again is just to make adjustments to project plans in the field as situation arrives. Contractors are typically trying to save money. That's just kind of their nature. They sometimes they kind of underestimate the time and expense for some of the project implementation in their bid. And so naturally, they'll try to figure out ways that they can make cost savings. Sometimes they have good ideas that are you know, that we can take advantage of. But often, you know, times they're trying to cut corners and do things that we don't want them to do. You know, we spent a lot of time in this design, so we need to make sure they follow it. Some of those examples are, you know, if they start trying to move in-stream aquatic structures, that gets really problematic, and so we need to make sure they don't do that. And in the event that it has to happen, we need to run that by a hydraulic engineer to make sure that, you know, we're not going to create an erosion problem or create a fish passage problem or something else. Some of the more simple ones are swapping out plant materials if they're having availability issues. You know, we can if some plant stock is not available, we could switch out, you know, one species for another as long as it still will do well in our environment. It's native, of course. So yeah, the answers to these kind of questions, when you can make these changes, it really just depends. But oftentimes, you know, if it's a more technical question, we have to run it up the chain to just make sure we're not going to have any huge impacts down the road. Another key thing, one of the biggest thing I think of implementation oversight is just documenting everything. It's really a way that you can just, you know, make sure you're doing everything right. It helps inform as-builts later on, but it just kind of covers your bases, because if questions do arise, if something does happen later on and people have questions for you, if you have a solid log documenting everything that happened and, you know, when it was happening, it's a good way to cover your bases. And photo documentation is a great way to do it. You can set up a remote sensing camera and it can just take pictures of each construction activity, and when the construction activity moves to the next site, you move your camera to the next spot, and that keeps you know, keeps a log of kind of what's happening on site. And also it's a fun way to kind of, the stakeholders love to see the photos of it kind of happening, because they often can't be out on site all the time. So here's an example. This is Megler Creek, which is on the Columbia River. It's a direct tributary, very near Astoria, but on the Washington side of the river. And it had a 24-inch tiny little culvert that I'll show you in a later slide. And we removed that 24-inch pipe, and we put in a 25-foot wide by 10-foot tall concrete box culvert. And this is the cut through the road prism, and here's your culvert coming in sections, lowered in by a giant crane that you see in the top of that photo there. You often run into challenging conditions, and again, this is where that log can come in really helpful. We had, for Megler Creek, we had everything from, you know, a snowstorm. I didn't get a good photo of when it had, like, you know, like 10 inches of snow out there or whatever it was, but we had snowstorms, windstorms, and we also had a huge flooding event. What you're looking at on the right picture is a fish bypass channel. We had to provide fish passage throughout construction. That the bypass channel was great. WDFW and the regulatory agencies loved it. It was awesome until you have major events like a windstorm that blows these trees down and demolishes your bypass channel, or you have a flooding event like the bottom left photo that, you know, we had some record rainfall that winter, and that bypass channel just could not accommodate the volume of water trying to come down that 1 square mile watershed.
That wasn't your construction activities, was it?
That was not. That was upriver.
Just making sure.
That was upriver coming in. This is, again, site inspector. You know, if you look at that site, it looks like turbid water, and turbid water is a no-no. So, you know, but when it comes from outside of your project into your project, there's not a whole lot you can do about it. But you have to document it to cover your bases.
That's how you document it.
Yeah. So, you know, site inspection has, you know, a lot of things, but one other key example that I think is important. A lot of times we have volunteer groups do planting efforts, and some of these people don't exactly know how to plant, you know, and they don't have a lot of history behind it. They're little plant plugs that have a little plastic tube sleeve. If you don't keep your eye on the kids, sometimes they'll just shove those right into the substrate, and the plant doesn't do too well. The survival isn't very good if it's still in its sleeve. Another example of inspection is, this is Megler Creek after it was restored, but the Park Service wanted us to, originally they wanted us to put this straw mulch on the entire site. Well, once we were doing the planting plan, they said, oh, can we do an experimental design? Can we do half of the site be straw mulched and the other half not be straw mulched to see how the veg responds with and without the mulch? Well, that's fine, but the contractor, it wasn't clear to them, so they had all this mulch on site. What they did was they put it all on the right-hand side as opposed to taking, to cutting the quantity in half and just doing the proper application. So we had almost like a foot deep of mulch, and as you can imagine, the veg didn't do very good, so then we had to go back and correct that. These are just some of our site inspection forms. This is more for, from a construction stormwater perspective. But, these are just things to cover your bases when you're out there and make sure you're doing your due diligence as the permit holder. Another thing that's natural that happens, and this is kind of touches on not only implementation oversight, but also on the scheduling side, delays happen. But there's different types of delays. There's the small delays, but there's also critical delays that impact milestones or completion dates. It can make you run up against your in-water work window. It can sometimes even make you have to request a variance to extend your in-water work window. But some of the key things you have to ask when a delay happens is, was the event a delay? How big of an impact is it going to have? Who was at fault for the delay? Was it our fault in the the designs and the specifications, or was it something the contractor was doing? Because delays often result in change orders and things like that, and so you have to know. Know who is at fault. This is an example. This is Megler Creek, but looking at it from the Columbia River side, this is before the culvert's been installed. We had to put this sheet pile cofferdam. That's what you're looking at here. This is sheet pile all right here. We had to keep the mighty Columbia River, which is tidal, out the project site while we excavated it. And one thing that happened was the contractor hadn't reviewed the geotechnical report, which gives you an idea of the substrate that's below ground and what you're likely going to experience as you're kind of, as you start excavation and start placing your culverts and things like that. Well, they hadn't reviewed the document thoroughly enough, and they were having a hard time driving this pile, and it ended up taking about 2 weeks longer than they anticipated, and they had to bring in bigger equipment. And they tried to hit us with a huge change order over $50,000, but we were able to lean on the documents that we had and show that, in the specs and in the geotechnical report, we laid out there that it was going to be rough driving, and that there was sandstone, and there were old railroad pile or trestles, underneath the road grade and all these things. And so that kind of saved us, and that made it so we didn't have to shoulder that change order cost, and it had to, the contractor had to cover that. Basically the probability of completing a successful project increases greatly when somebody is involved in planning, design, restoration, and is also in a position to oversee the project. Eyes on the ground when you've been involved from the beginning of the design process, and you've been involved in the project from the very beginning all the way to the end, goes a long ways in making a smooth project happen. You can answer questions quickly as opposed to having to stop and call your engineer for every single question. If you were there from the beginning to the end and your eyes are on the ground and you're out there, you can really be a very helpful tool for the contractor. And one important other thing I kind of want to say before I wrap my segment up here is that, us as project managers out there, we are not the policemen. We're not we sort of are, but we're more like a teacher. We have to be really careful, and we can't tell the project or the contractor how to do their job, because then we start taking on liability. We can't tell them that, dig a trench like this, exactly like this right here. We can, tell them if they have questions about the designs. We can answer their questions, but we can't tell them how to do their job, because that's when we start taking on liability, and that's something that you as a project manager don't want to do. You don't want to get in that battle.
Right.
So this is after Megler Creek was all complete, and I'll just go through these photos here. This is it was flowing out a 24-inch pipe that was only 15% passable to salmon, and now this is 100% stream simulation, 100% passable during all tidal conditions for fish, and it opened up 1.8 miles of spawning habitat in addition to that migratory habitat for upriver stocks that have to pass through the estuary twice. This provides an opportunity for them to get off the main stem and into some good intertidal rearing habitat where they can get big and strong and grow before their life at sea. Here's some of the wood habitat structures and things like that we installed. This is before the planting plan, so unfortunately I don't think I included a post-planting plan photo, but that's the old culvert that the fish had to pass through beforehand, and that, as you can see, it was 15% passable. Seems like a stretch to me. It doesn't look like it's passable at all, but believe it or not, there were fish in there beforehand, but now there's a lot more. And that's after. So we've got before and after. And then I just want to try this out. Micah, I don't know if it'll work, but it's just a really short video.
Okay.
I don't think it's going to work.
That's too bad.
Yeah, but it basically just shows that right after the project, juvenile fish hanging out in the pools, and it's Narayan got in there with a snorkel and a camera and got there was a lot of coho hanging out in the pools, and it's pretty cool to see, after you've spent all this time and with this project, to see the fish coming back.
So that's on the Washington side, up from the bridge, right? Up
Correct.
in Washington.
Yeah, so this is about a mile east of the bridge from Astoria to Washington.
No, I stood right there.
Yeah, and to give you all some perspective, it's been a long time since I was at CREST, but I was taking regulatory folks and funders out to this site to begin the feasibility dialogue. So, these things take a while.
Start to finish then for that project, how long? 4 year, 5 year?
It depends on when you define the start.
What you classify as your starting point.
But roughly 4 or 5 years, something like that?
I would say design alone, 2 or 3 years, and then construction took about 4 months. But everything leading up to that took a lot longer. I mean, this project was identified, Micah, you were talking about this project probably in 2008, and it wasn't finished until 2017.
Yep.
Yeah.
But
So this is really great, you guys, but heads up, we have about 5 minutes.
Yeah, I'm moving on to Tom.
All right. Well, Jason's really giving me a lot of time, but I've got another case study.
Sue him.
What's that?
Sue him.
Yeah. I'll bring lawyers in. This is just kind of an innovative design that we came up with. There was this wetland out on Sauvie Island. It was about 122 acres, and it had a water control structure installed that was blocking habitat access. It was dominated by invasive reed canary grass. And it's part of this larger network of backwater sloughs and wetlands. I'll just go through real quick, but basically this is the Columbia River here, and you've got this nice backwater refugia for out-migrating salmon to come in. And so you can see this is all dominated by reed canary grass. It's higher elevation, and this is lower elevations dominated by wapato, bulrush, other natives. And this is actually, this is the water control structure, so it's basically a giant dam in the way. And that is a lovely fish egress pipe, which is like 12 inches. So we basically came up with a design where if you were to lower the marsh plane about 2.5 feet, you would extend periods of inundation and duration of water. And that would have positive benefits for native veg, as well as fish access, and also migratory waterfowl would have a lot more opportunity areas. So I'll go through these pretty quick, but basically we did our isolation, and this is us kind of ripping out this structure in sections. And then it was a very beautiful day taking all this stuff out of the stream and onto the mainland. And then here's some pictures of us actually lowering the elevation of the marsh plain. And we moved 40,000 cubic yards over a 10-acre area we lowered in elevation.
So was that actually a restoration to a previous condition, or was that just a design target that you had for that change in elevation?
It was a restoration in that we were returning fish access to the 122 acres, but it was an enhancement in that even with the removal of the water control structure, you were still going to have reed canary grass unless you lowered the marsh plain elevations.
And that has to do with the contemporary river hydrograph and the management of the dams.
Correct.
Oh,
So I know I'm running out of time, but no project is without challenges. We had horrible weather, even though it's sunny in this photo. Everything got bogged down. We got haul trucks stuck in the mud. Seemed like everything was lost. And then we had a really nice October, and we were able to complete it. But basically, these are the areas that we lowered. These are some local stool kids putting in plantings, and you could see. I've got some aerials in a minute, but basically, these lowered areas it's too wet for invasives. And then this is a shot of a beaver coming up to one of our plant exclusion fences trying to get a snack. Beaver and Nutria had a real party out there. We put in like 25,000 plants, and probably 60% of them got grazed or taken by these guys. So constantly evolving. But this is what the site looks like now. Is that dam was going right across. It's revegetated along the side slopes. And then specifically in the wetlands, this all up here was reed canary grass. And now you can see that's all wapato down in there. And it's just champsia and other native grasses going along the side slopes. So using this method has really shown positive results for native veg. And that's also all that additional amphibian habitat where it was just invasive grass, waterfowl habitat, and other things. Just a few more photos of that. Here's kind of the telling tale. So before there was this 10 acres of all reed canary grass, and this was taken right after construction. This is all the areas that we changed. And just real quickly, this was the first project of a 5-year sequence. And that 122 acre project with all of its benefits really helped me build the trust with the landowner, the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. And it's just led to project after project after project. As of now, I've done 9 projects over the last 5 years, just within this short geographic area, connected over 430 acres of habitat. So again, going back to your reputation, your ability to get projects completed on the ground, it can lead to really great things and really reconnected mosaics of restoration. I'll quickly just say, just a couple quick lessons learned, and I'll let you guys go. If you buy a railcar bridge is an old railroad car that they turn into a deck. They put a timber deck on it. Make sure there's no little nubs on the end that you have to do some field fitting blowtorch. But perfect example of we had a crane out there, we had the contractor out there, and luckily we had an ODFW employee with a blowtorch to make just that final field fit. And then also expect the unexpected. I'll just leave it on that. This is a cultural resource that we found on another one of my projects. And literally we were digging out this levee, and this stone bowl came rolling down right into my lap, basically. And luckily we had an archaeologist available. We were able to work through it. But you never know what'll come up. So try to plan your best, but also have contingency plans for your contingency plans. And I think that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, Micah, you can email us with questions. I know we didn't really give you time.
Yeah, we'll do that. We'll follow up with you as needed.
Okay.
That's really wonderful.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks. I'm I'm really stoked to see that method